She was sent to charm the human leader. Pregnancy was never in the plan. Liara stood in the great silver hall of the council ship, her long cloak brushing against the smooth floor. She was the most skilled diplomat in her star system, and the council had chosen her for a mission only she could complete. Her task was simple in words but dangerous in reality: travel to Earth, charm the human leader, and convince him to trust her people. If she succeeded, the humans would lower their defenses, and her world would gain the advantage. If she failed, there would be no second chance. She kept her face calm, but inside, she felt the weight of 1,000 watching eyes. The council members spoke to her in low, serious voices, reminding her of every detail. "Remember Liara," said the high speaker. "He is clever, he is cautious, but all men are weak to beauty and kindness." Liara nodded, hiding the small twist of discomfort in her chest. She had used her charm before, but this time was different. This time, she would have to stay close to her target for days, maybe weeks. And this time, her target was not just a man. He was the human commander who had ended 2 wars with his strategies. James Hale. The journey to Earth took 3 days through the Worm Gate. Liara spent the time studying everything about James. She watched recordings of his speeches, noting the way he spoke: direct, confident, but with a softness when he talked about his crew. She learned he was a former soldier who had seen too much death, and she read that he hated spies more than anything. That last detail made her pause, her fingers still over the datapad. She shook off the feeling, reminding herself that he would never know who she really was. When her shuttle touched down on the human base, the air felt heavy and different. The sky was a pale blue, and the sun was warmer than on her home world. Soldiers in dark uniforms stood around the landing platform, watching her every step, and then, through the line of guards, she saw him, Commander James Hale. Taller than she expected, broad shoulders, sharp eyes that missed nothing. He did not smile, but he also did not frown. Instead, he studied her, as if he could see straight through the layers of her plan. She walked forward, offering her hand in the human way she had practiced. "Commander Hale," she said, her voice smooth. "Thank you for receiving me." His grip was firm, his voice calm. "Welcome to Earth, Ambassador Liara." The moment their hands touched, she felt a strange jolt like static, but deeper. She quickly pulled her hand back, hiding the reaction with a graceful smile. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, but before she could read more, an alarm blared through the base. Red lights flashed on the walls, soldiers moved quickly, and a voice shouted over the speakers, "Perimeter breach, possible pirate scouts." Without hesitation, James stepped closer to her. "Stay with me," he said. It was not a request. He guided her through the corridors, his pace fast but steady. She could hear the echo of boots, the hiss of doors opening and closing, the low hum of weapons being powered. Lyra's heart raced. This was not part of her plan. She was supposed to meet him in a calm, formal setting. Instead, she was being pulled deeper into the heart of the human base. Every step took her further away from the safe walls of her shuttle. They reached a control room where large screens showed moving shapes on the edge of the base's radar. James gave quick orders to his team, his voice strong and sure. Liara stood slightly behind him, pretending to be a silent guest, but she was watching everything. The humans moved with precision, each soldier trusting his orders without question. It reminded her of her own people's fleets, but there was something different here. There was no fear in their faces, only determination. The alert ended quickly, the pirate scouts turning out to be harmless debris from an old satellite. Still, the tension in the room did not fade completely. James finally turned back to her. "You'll be safe here, but until our sensors are sure, I want you to stay inside the main building." She gave a polite nod, hiding her thoughts. In truth, being so close to him had unsettled her. It was supposed to be an act, her smile, her gentle words, but she found herself actually listening to the tone of his voice. There was no fake politeness, only a man who meant what he said. That night, she was given a guest room in the same secured wing as his quarters. Her orders from the council echoed in her mind: get close, gain his trust, and find his secrets. But as she looked out of the window at the human soldiers patrolling in the cold night air, she felt something unusual for a spy on her first day. It wasn't victory she wanted, it was something else, something she couldn't yet name. The meteor storm came without warning, thick streaks of fire tearing through the night sky and striking the horizon with deafening shockwaves. Liara had seen storms before, but never this close. Never with the sky burning in so many colors at once. The human base shuddered with each impact, and somewhere deep inside, alarms howled like desperate animals. She gripped the railing in the observation hall, watching fragments of glowing rock crash into the nearby mountains. James appeared beside her, his voice calm but urgent. Communications are down, storms interfering with the signal. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, and though his tone was steady, she could read the tension behind it. The next hours blurred into a haze of emergency repairs and controlled chaos. Liara followed James through narrow maintenance corridors, lit only by red emergency strips. Technicians and soldiers moved around them, welding panels shut, dragging heavy cables, shouting over the sound of impact after impact. James gave orders with quick hand gestures, never raising his voice, and yet everyone obeyed instantly. She realized something then: he didn't need to force authority. He simply had it. When a power relay blew out, sparks rained from the ceiling, and James pushed her out of the way without hesitation. Her shoulder hit the wall, and for a second she almost snapped at him. But the look in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't thinking about protocol or appearances. He had simply acted to protect her. And for reasons she didn't fully understand, that small, unplanned moment stayed with her. By the time the storm passed, the base was scarred, scorch marks on walls, smoke drifting in the cold air, the smell of burned metal everywhere. The long-range communication array was ruined, which meant no shuttle could come for her until repairs were complete. Days, maybe weeks, trapped here. Exactly the kind of proximity her mission could benefit from. Myth. She stayed focused, but something deep in her chest warned that focus was already slipping. That evening, the base settled into a strange quiet, the kind that comes after disaster. Liara found herself in the small mess hall with James, sharing a table lit by a single dim lamp. He told her about the first meteor storm he'd ever seen as a young officer, his voice steady but distant. She laughed at one detailer, rookie soldier hiding under a table, and was startled by the warmth in her own voice. She was supposed to be measuring his reactions, mapping his weaknesses, but she was leaning forward instead, wanting to know more. Later, when the power dipped again, plunging the hallway into shadows, James walked her back to her quarters. The base felt different in the dark, more dangerous, more alive, as if unseen things were moving beyond the walls. Halfway down the corridor, they heard a faint metallic clang. James froze, then stepped in front of her, hand on his weapon. They waited, breath held, until the sound faded. When they moved again, she noticed her own pulse was racing, not just from the sound, but from the space between them, barely an arm's length apart. That night, alone in her room, Liara stared at the ceiling. Her mission was still clear in her mind, but the man she was sent to manipulate was no longer just a name and a file, and that, she knew, was dangerous in ways her council had never prepared her for. The supply run was meant to be routine, a short trip beyond the safety of the base to retrieve emergency power cells from an old outpost buried in the snow. Liara rode beside James in the armored transport, the hum of the engine vibrating through the floor, the windows fogged by the frozen air outside. She told herself she was only here to observe, to learn his methods beyond the walls, but her gaze kept drifting to the way his gloved hands rested steady on the controls. The man had the focus of a soldier and the silence of someone who'd seen too much. The outpost came into view, like a shadow rising from the blizzard, its roof bent under years of ice. They stepped out into the freezing wind, their boots crunching on layers of snow and metal debris. Inside, the air was stale and sharp with rust, each breath burning her lungs. James moved ahead with a flashlight, the beam slicing through the dark, and she followed her footsteps, almost lost under the groan of the old structure. They found the power cells stacked in a corner, half buried under a fallen support beam. James crouched to lift it, and that was when the silence outside shattered sharp bursts of gunfire echoing through the snow. Lyra's chest tightened. James didn't even flinch, just hissed down, and dragged her behind the cover of a metal crate. Through a crack in the wall, she saw them pirates, their armor patched with mismatched plates, eyes glowing faintly. In the snowlight, they had tracked the transport here, and now they were closing in. James's voice was low, calm. "When I say run, you run to the vehicle. Don't look back," she almost argued, but the look in his eyes cut off her words. A moment later, the wall to their left burst inward, shards of ice and steel flying past. James shoved her flat against the floor, his body between her and the opening, the air around them vibrating with the sound of weapons. Her heart hammered, not from the cold, but from the weight of him shielding her. When he finally pulled her to her feet, they moved as one, dodging through shadows and broken walls. Every sound seemed amplified. Crunch of boots, the hiss of snow against metal, the quick, controlled breaths they shared. They burst out into the storm, running low, the transport a dark shape ahead. A shot rang out, searing the air near her head, and without thinking, she grabbed James's arm to pull him faster. They slammed into the vehicle together, doors locking, engine roaring to life. Only when they were speeding away did she realize her hands were still gripping his arm. He glanced at her, eyes searching her face for signs of injury. "I told you not to look back," he said quietly. "I didn't," she replied, her voice low. "I was looking at you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and for the first time since she'd met him, James Hale looked unsettled. The storm outside had passed, but inside the base, the air felt heavier than the snow clouds ever had. James's quarters were dim, lit only by the soft glow of a wall screen. Liara sat across from him at a narrow table, a medkit open between them, her hands steady as she cleaned the gash on his arm. He hadn't spoken much since the pirate attack, but now his voice broke the silence. Low and deliberate. "You knew the pirates were out there before we left, didn't you?" Her fingers froze over the bandage. "That's a strange thing to ask," she said softly. Trying to keep her tone neutral, James's gaze didn't waver, those sharp human eyes narrowing as if they could peel away the layers of her calm. "I've been a soldier too long to believe in coincidences," he replied. "They were waiting for us. Lyra someone told them where we'd be." A dozen careful lies flickered through her mind. She could tell him she was innocent. She could blame faulty security logs. She could play the role of the insulted guest. But something in his expression stopped her. There was no anger in his voice, only a quiet kind of disappointment. It was far more dangerous than rage. She pressed the bandage against his skin and met his gaze, forcing a small smile. "If you truly believed I led them to us, I wouldn't be here," she said. His lips curved a knot, in agreement, but in the smallest ghost of a smirk. "You're right," he murmured. "You wouldn't." The conversation should have ended there, but it didn't. Later that night, she found herself walking the quiet corridors alone, the base silent, except for the faint hum of the generators. She paused outside the observation deck, drawn by the sight of James standing there, looking out at the frozen horizon. He didn't turn when she approached. "You're hiding something?" he said quietly. "I don't know what it is yet, but I will." Her breath caught. This was the moment she should have pulled away, returned to her quarters, built the wall back up between them. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough to see the faint reflection of her face in the glass beside his. "If you find it, will you still keep me here?" she asked. James turned his head slightly, his voice almost too low to hear. That depends on whether you give me a reason to. The words stayed with her long after she left the deck, for the first time since arriving. She wondered if her greatest danger here wasn't the council's orders, or the pirates, but the man she'd been sent to deceive. The message arrived in the middle of the night. No sound, no light, just a faint pulse on the small crystal hidden inside Leora's boot. She sat up in the dark, her fingers hesitating before she touched it. The cold blue glow filled the room, and the face of the council's shadow agent appeared. His voice was flat, stripped of anything human. You've been in position long enough. Liara, it's time to finish your task. Extract the human leader's strategic archives, and transmit them by dawn. Her mouth felt dry. And if I refuse? She asked, though she already knew the answer. The figure didn't blink. You've been watched since you left our ship. We know you've grown close. That is why refusal will be treated as treason. And you know what happens to traitors? The glow faded, leaving her in darkness. She sat still for a long time, listening to the hum of the heating vents. She could imagine the council's hunters already on their way. Her orders were clear, but so was the weight in her chest, the thought of James discovering the truth and looking at her the way he had in suspicion before. That, somehow, felt worse than execution. Hours before dawn, she slipped into the secure command room. Her access codes opened the door with a quiet hiss. The archives sat waiting on the terminal. One touch, and she could send them home. Her hand hovered over the console, then moved to the side, pressing the deletion command instead. Lines of data vanished in a silent cascade. Gone forever. She didn't hear him enter. What did you just do? James's voice came from behind her, low and unreadable. She turned, forcing a calm expression. I ended a mistake, she said. He studied her for a long moment, the shadows in the room cutting sharp lines across his face. You should know, he said finally. The moment you did that, you made enemies you can't run from. She almost told him she'd never planned to run, but before she could speak, the base alarms flared again, not for pirates this time, but for something worse. The council's hunters had arrived, and they weren't coming for data. They were coming for her. The hunters came like shadows with teeth. No warning shots, no demands, just the sound of boots hitting the floor and the sharp hiss of plasma weapons charging. James grabbed Leah's wrist before the first blast struck, pulling her into a side corridor as the wall behind them exploded into molten shards. Move, he barked, his grip firm but not cruel. She didn't argue. Not when she could feel the heat of another shot graze past her shoulder. They cut through the base in a blur, James navigating blind corners and sealed hatches with the instincts of someone who'd done this 100 times. Lyra's breath burned in her chest. Not from the pace, but from the knowledge that every step farther from the command room was a step deeper into his world. By the time they reached the outer hangar, the air smelled of oil and cold metal. James shoved her into the cockpit of a narrow scout skimmer, climbed in after her, and fired the engines before the doors had even fully opened. The craft shot into the night like a thrown blade, the lights of the base shrinking behind them. The frozen terrain stretched out below jagged ridges, black rivers of ice, valleys that swallowed sound. The skimmer's sensors pinged quietly, showing 3 hunter craft following at a distance. They won't stop, Liara said, her voice barely above a whisper. They'll stop. James replied without looking at her, one way or another. Hours blurred as they pushed deeper into the wilderness. At last, James set the skimmer down in the ruins of an old mining station half buried in snow. The wind howled through broken steel beams, and the cold cut through her coat like it wasn't. There, inside, the air was dry and bitter, but the walls at least blocked the wind. James dragged over a metal crate, sat on it, and finally met her eyes. You've got about 30 seconds to explain why the hell a kill squad wants you dead before I decide if keeping you alive is worth it. Her throat tightened. She could give him the safe version, the lie she'd practiced, but something in the way he looked at her steady, tired, but unwilling to back down, made it impossible, so she told him, piece by piece, about the mission, the orders, the moment she chose not to betray him. When she finished, he didn't speak, he just stood, walked past her to check the door and came back, tossing a thermal blanket over her shoulders. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow, we make sure no one follows us. Liara lay down on the cold floor, the blanket holding the faintest trace of his scent. She knew the hunters would keep coming, but for the first time, she also knew she wasn't running from them alone. Dawn came pale and sharp, the kind of light that made the frozen wasteland look endless. James was already awake, standing at the edge of the mining station's broken wall. Scanning the horizon with a battered field scope, Liara pushed herself up, the cold biting at her skin, even through the blanket. They're here, he said without turning, his voice calm, almost too calm. Far off, 3 dark shapes moved across the snow, hunter craft gliding low like predators closing in on prey. They didn't have the fuel to outrun them. James knew it, and from the look in her eyes, Liara did too. He pulled open a crate, tossing her a compact blaster. You can shoot, he asked. Not well, she admitted. Then stay behind me and learn fast. The hunters arrived without hesitation, fanning out in a silent arc, their armor a glint of silver against the white. The leader stepped forward, visor reflecting. The pale sun, returned the defector, his voice carried easily in the still air. And we let you walk away, human. James didn't move. Not happening, he said, his tone flat but certain. Liara felt something strange in that moment, not fear, but a fierce kind of pride. The fight broke like ice under too much weight. Blaster fire cut through the air, snow burst up in sharp clouds, and James moved like the terrain itself obeyed him. She tried to follow his steps, her hands trembling around the weapon. When one hunter broke past his guard, she fired without thinking, the shot striking true. The man fell, and the look James gave her was quick, but full of something unspoken. Minutes felt like hours, but when the last hunter fell still in the snow, the silence that followed was heavier than the fight. James lowered his weapon, his breath steaming in the air. You're free now, he said. They won't send more, not after this. Liara wanted to believe him, but freedom didn't feel like what was sitting in her chest. It felt like something else. Something she hadn't planned for. Weeks later, back on the base, the war between their worlds cooled under uneasy talks. Liara stayed, her official title. Now liaison, though both of them knew she was something else entirely. And one quiet morning, as she stood by the medbay window, she felt the smallest flutter beneath her hand. James stepped in behind her, his voice low. You going too? Tell me, or let me figure it out. She turned, meeting his eyes. It wasn't in the plan, she said softly, but it's ours. In that moment, she realized the mission had ended a long time ago, and something much greater had begun.